Okay, so we're on the mic. Simone, thanks for joining me. I know we've been trying to do this for a little while, but we've been seeing each other at networking events, popping in and out all over the place.
Yes.
Yeah, so I've been excited to talk because who connected us? Was it Andrew? Or no, it was
You keep
Mark
saying that
Picard.
Mark Picard connected
Right,
us,
Mark
and he
Picard.
connected us like before COVID.
Right.
And the irony is that
we were supposed to have
COVID brought us
coffee.
together. Yes.
Yeah, we were have coffee, supposed to meet, and then we connected in one of the groups. We're like, oh wait, we're supposed to see each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was actually your networking event that we met, and as we saw each, we reunited again. Yes, I was doing a presentation for your group.
Right, for the morning, Mark's group. He had brought me into that group.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, that's how I got involved in that one. So yeah, nice. The funny thing is this week I'm doing a Zoom training for them. I'm like, I'm an attorney, right? They're like, yeah, but Zoom, and we're going to have to do Zoom now for our businesses, and we want to know. So I had to beef up on Zoom. I got to do this on Wednesday.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
All right, so let's get into Simone, about, kind of like where you grew up, your background, your training, like how you got to what you're doing now. And then we could talk about all the coaching you do for entrepreneurs. And, a lot of small business owners are afraid in this whole thing that's going on which is going to continue for a long time, and how they get back to work and how they remarket. I mean, it's like a new world for them, for a lot of these business owners. So
it is.
I'll leave it for you. You can tell me about where you grew up.
And a lot of reframing. I'm from Jamaica, and so
I am from your New Jersey accent.
I'm an immigrant and strong and proud woman business owner.
Yeah.
My background actually though is from pharmacy, and that's really where I got a lot of my foray into the business world.
Okay.
I wanted to reinvent myself. I didn't want to be a traditional pharmacist, so I went into areas that would pull me, grow me. So I went into communications as my first area within the pharmaceutical industry.
But did you become a trained pharmacist first?
I am a trained pharmacist first, actively licensed in 3 states.
Right. So you know all about these drugs they're talking about. Absolutely. And they're like, that's not going to work.
That's not going to work. And it's interesting because my first therapeutic area that I was writing on was malaria.
Oh, so you knew all about hydrochloroquine, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of it was dealing with a lot of the doctors and the healthcare professionals outside of the country, outside of the United States at the time. So when it just came 360 again for me, I'm like, malaria, hydrochloroquine, what?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So that's a whole other story, and that's a whole other podcast that we can go through.
Right, it's an interesting side of things.
From that space, though, what intrigued me mostly about going into the communications piece is that it stretched me from working with all levels across the organization. I was working with FDA, I was working with WHO, I was working with NIH, I was working with a lot of PhDs. And so from that perspective, really helping me to grow, not only as a writer, but also how to look at information, how to become more analytical, and just being able to communicate across all those lines, because each of them valued something differently, and I had to be able to break that down so that way they would hear me and listen to me.
Yeah. They speak their own language, so
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And then from there, had a great opportunity to go to France, and I was in the south of France actually,
very nice.
Sophia Antipolis, near Nice, and it was fantastic because that's where also I got on the business side, believe it or not, of the healthcare industry. And as a consultant working with the huge companies, so I was working with GE when they were big in healthcare. I was working with J&J, Volkswagen, lots of these companies. And it really got me to not only be able to work with smart leaders, but also, again, to be able to showcase my skill sets and what I had to bring to the table.
And you were doing what, executive training for the executives of pharma companies?
I was doing a lot of business consulting at that time frame, so a lot of management consulting, and ended up working with a futurist from Canada during that time.
Futurist?
Yes.
What's a futurist?
They basically come together globally and talk about what's the future going to look like in terms of driving the world from thoughts, from products, from you name it. They are talking about things like 10, 15 years from now.
Like the kind of things that like people like Elon Musk are doing, like dictating
technology and absolutely the meeting of the minds. These are ultra
that must have been
people.
Fascinating, right?
It was from that perspective. And also too, I ended up working with they were doing a lot of coaching, executive coaching work too, so got experience with Myers-Briggs and how that worked in terms of from an organizational perspective and things of that nature. And so it was really just a hodgepodge of things being thrown at me, and being not only that too, working in another language. So I'm learning French during this time, and and really,
You didn't speak French when you went over
I
there?
didn't know I was learning it,
Oh,
but I really
wow.
became very ultimately
It works
proficient
when you get
because you have
immersed
to.
in the culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yes. The food, the culture, the people, it was truly fantastic. And then that was also a motivator for me to get my MBA. So I said, you know what, let me get back to the States. My consulting experience is winding down. And so I got back to the States to get my MBA. And that's where I was thrusted back into the pharmaceutical side, but on the marketing end. So
Okay.
doing a lot of consumer marketing, doing a lot of RX marketing, and really thrusted into that space.
And were you an in-house employee, or were you a consultant where you worked with many companies
I was working
at that point?
in-house as an FTE, full-time equivalent.
Got it.
And yeah, so after the MBA, got thrusted into that space. And so, yeah, and that's where it kind of grew from there. So I ended up working with a lot of, called health and beauty aid products, a lot of like baby products, analgesic products.
Right.
And that really, and I loved it because I love the consumer end, because you have direct, again, communicating and really understanding what drives their behaviors,
Yeah.
from that piece. A lot of analytical work too, because most people don't think marketing has a lot of numbers, but you're doing a lot of numbers and a lot of understanding behaviors based on numbers and making decisions on that. So
Data,
that's
right?
another thing.
Basically, right?
Absolutely. I'm a
Yeah,
big data
sure.
geek.
Right.
So yeah.
So were you at J&J or one of the other pharmaceutical companies?
Another one, but I worked with J&J at one point also
Yeah.
on that end. Yeah. So then what happened is that I was doing a lot of the consumer end. I said, you know what, I want to get back onto the medical side of things.
Okay.
So had an opportunity to go back, and I could, you miss the science part of things, and I'm a science brain.
Yeah.
So went on to the communication side within the healthcare industry, and from that space, my areas were cardiovascular, oncology, women's health, and
So the pharma
diabetes.
companies interacting with
Healthcare professionals,
cardiologists and medical
absolutely,
professionals.
and
Got
medical
it.
professionals, and
Okay.
patients too. And that was also
Okay.
something that was driving me, because I loved understanding human behavior,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the things that brought me from that space. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then you progress. So at what point did you start going like out on your own and working independently in different companies and so forth?
Sure. I broke away from the corporate world. That was a
Yeah.
huge thing. To about 8 years ago, 8.5 years ago, and started my company, which is Your Choice Coach. And really,
Okay.
what the driver to that were a couple of things. One is that even with my teams, when I was working with them, it was more about not necessarily what we were getting done, but really around who are we, what type of culture are we trying to create, right? From that perspective. And those were always the questions I was asking and bringing to the table, because it was not most important in terms of what we're doing, but why are we doing it, and who are we, and how are we driving that from that perspective of our values.
Right.
And then one day my team, they said to me, we don't really know you. And I said, what do you mean you don't know me? And what I stepped back about and really heard is that, how do we connect you as a human?
Right.
Right? Break you down as a human being. And so when I did that, the second part, when I came in as to the next meeting, that's what I talked about. I led with who I am, and I shared things that I thought people knew, but I guess they didn't really know, like my
Right.
hobbies and my family and all these other things. And that had such a great impact that, just in terms of connection, just in terms of collaboration, just in terms of people connecting, the feedback and the positive feedback that was received from that interaction. So I said, you know what, moving forward, once a month, we're going to spotlight people. So I spotlight someone
Okay.
else to share, not what they do. We led with who you are. And that also helped in terms of us getting more deeper in terms of our understandings, in terms of how we worked, and just have more of a positive atmosphere. So that was my aha moment, to say, you know what, people like this and they need this.
Yeah.
And that's what got me away from the corporate world, and bring it back to more of this, the softer skills, the more humanistic qualities that people want to have, but maybe can't have the opportunity to share.
Yeah. And it's valuable to other people to see how they're doing it and what they're doing and who they are, and
Yeah,
more of a
it
human
is.
connection.
It is. Once you find commonalities, you have so much more to share than if you think you put your assumptions and judgments into conversations,
Yeah. Like
right?
you're isolated. It's funny. I think maybe I should write a book on this. I think that we talk about like consciousness and self-awareness, and it doesn't matter what field you're Brene Brown, or you're
Yep.
somebody I interviewed from Cleveland who's a habit scientist
Yep.
and neuroscience, all these things. And a lot of it has to do with the consciousness of realizing either what you're doing, what you're not, you're doing, what you're uncomfortable about, what your skills are, as opposed to walking around and not realizing
Yeah.
things or what you're doing, how it's affecting other
Think
people. Or
yeah.
I think you mentioned to me, or was it you mentioned in some of these Zoom meetings, sometimes you have these expressions on your face and you don't even realize, and you're thinking about something else, and the person's
Yeah.
talking, and I had somebody say to me, like, boy, you really rolled your eyes at that person. I go, what are you talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, that wasn't what was going on in my mind. And I
Right.
think you have to be conscious of those kind of things. You don't think about it, but it's like, it's funny because self-conscious, you should be self-conscious, meaning you're conscious of yourself, but self-conscious is used as a word that you're uncomfortable about something, or you're right. So
That's why I
it's
say self-awareness, right?
self-awareness, and
Self,
consciousness is a better term, right? It's
yes,
just
it's
funny that that's what's developed.
it is.
Self-conscious is a bad thing because you're self-conscious and you can't speak to people, and
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff. It's funny, but it goes across from even public speaking. I mean, if you're conscious and self-aware of what you're doing and who you are, that's different than being self-conscious and then getting so nervous that you can't,
Right.
give
Right.
a
And that's what I
eulogy
love
at
about
a
the emotional intelligence piece, because what it does is it, as an assessment tool,
right,
is to help you understand those dynamics from how do I view myself, right? Because
right,
everyone has their own ways of seeing themselves, but when you actually see it on a research-based results, it's kind of like validation. It's like, oh my gosh, this is how I really am being, and breaks it
right,
down even minute in terms of what's impacting that way in which you perceive yourself. And
right,
then you talk about the self-consciousness, where it's more about how you're expressing yourself. But in that moment, are you aware of how you're being perceived and received?
right. It's
Not
never
only
the way
that,
you perceive it. Right?
exactly,
The way I
exactly.
remember when I first would hear my voice, like in the car when we were doing these podcasts, it was a little uncomfortable at first. You hear your voice, it's weird. It sounds different. Your voice always sounds different to you, right? Because it's through your head or whatever. I don't know. Than other people, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, people get very self-conscious about that kind of stuff, but I think you get comfortable with it after a while. You know, excuse me, it's like that. I don't know if it's Brene Brown or somebody calls it like your first time or first thing, or whatever. The first time you do something, it's always like you don't even hear. I mean, it's just overwhelming,
Yeah,
and then you become comfortable with
comfortable.
things. I guess
Practice, right?
that's a
The
lot about emotional
practice, yeah,
intelligence.
yeah,
Yeah,
and the practice
yeah,
piece that
right,
goes along
because
with it.
yeah, and then you're at the point where you're just not like freaking out that you're actually speaking. You're actually now honing your skills and
Right.
become. You can't expect too much. Like the first time you give something
No,
a try.
absolutely not. And I
Yeah,
think that you can't expect to, hit it out the park, as they say,
yeah,
the first time. Then that's the key thing, is that awareness piece. Like, oh my gosh, I'm aware now. And then,
right,
okay, so what do I do about it? And how do I improve it? What's working and what's not working?
right.
And taking that into consideration as you get into that honing of your skills and that journey. So absolutely.
Yeah,
But
honing of your
yeah,
skills. I think that like somebody works with you, they can't expect in 1 or 2 sessions, like in the first session or 2, they're just becoming aware of what's going on and what they're doing, and to really and they're going to fail. Like I think that that's something important that business
mm,
owners, small business owners, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, especially when they're working with you and so forth, they will fail. It's not a question of like you might fail if you take
right.
it. It's just a question of what you fail at, right?
Absolutely. But to
So
think too, yeah,
that's okay.
yeah,
That's how
absolutely.
you learn,
Yes.
you know?
You're absolutely right in terms of that pace, but it also becomes your willingness, because everyone said, you asked the question about who wants change, and everyone wants change, but who wants to change?
Right.
And that's where hands go, well, I don't know, because
Yeah, I don't want to
that's where the
fail. I
work,
don't want that to happen, right?
and that's where a lot of work comes in, to be very intentional and focused and disciplined around that. So that
Yeah.
way, you're not only awareness, yeah, I'm aware of it, but now you're choosing to take a different course of action
Yeah,
once you have
intentional
that
is a good
awareness.
word, because a lot of people don't do things intentionally. They just kind of sit in the passenger seat and they expect life to be different, and then they're upset about it. And I'm like, well, you got to drive the car a little bit.
Hello. You have to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't have to do it 100%. You don't have to be an eight. I mean, there's some A types that are crazy intense. You know them, I know them, and they're,
Yeah.
but that's
Yep.
fine. That fits their personality. Is that good for everybody? I mean, I'm A
No.
type sometimes. Sometimes I'm very passive about things. It's fine.
But you also raise a great point too, in terms of really understanding where people are in their gradient and working with them. And I think that's the key thing. Like if you,
Right.
I call like an eagle, if you're an eagle, like you're stepping out of your comfort zone constantly, you're taking risks. Not everybody's like that. And some
No.
people can get intimidated by that.
Right.
but how you adapt and become more flexible. And that's where the emotional intelligence comes into place, around being able to flex your style so that way you can include others in conversations and you can include others in decision making and bring them
Right.
on your fold. And that's where the
Right.
key nuance takes
Right. But still
place.
working within the framework in which you're comfortable, right?
Yeah,
You don't make somebody into an eagle that's not an eagle, and the only thing they
right,
do is stay up all night worrying about what they got to do the next day because they're so nervous and they're so overwhelmed. It's just
right.
not
No,
their
we're not
comfort
all about,
zone.
no, we're right. We're not
Yeah.
about that. We're about stretching you to get out, to realize where your boundaries are within that. But
Right.
then we're going to stretch you too in
Yeah. You
terms
can
of that
step outside the
space.
circle a little bit. You just don't want to go 3 miles away. You just want to keep a couple of feet so you can jump back in. And then you get more comfortable with it. Look, there's people that develop, right? I guess they work with you. And next thing you know, they're way outside the circle. And they're like,
Right,
wow, look at that. I'm all the way over here. It's not so scary, you know?
right, exactly,
Because
exactly.
I think in life when it comes to dealing with, especially as an entrepreneur, because a lot of times you feel like you're an island and you're kind of isolated. It's not as scary as you think it is. Like when it's happening and you finally get there, you know, not that I want to do it, but I understand that if you go to Tony Robbins seminars, you walk on the coals, like
Yes, you
it
do
can be
walk on
done,
coals.
you know? So yeah, everything's like, it always looks scary more from the outside than the inside. Your friend
Hmm.
has triplets and you're like, oh my God, I can never do that at the same time. But when it's happening,
You rise to
it
that
just
moment and the
happens.
occasion. You
Yeah.
rise to the occasion, and then you realize that you are being. I use the word being something else,
Yeah.
and in that moment, and
Right. You're
so, and I think
strengthening and yeah, definitely. And then
absolutely
you're right. You find that dealing with the next thing isn't so bad.
right,
You know,
right,
maybe we'll be better at the next pandemic. We won't freak out so much, you
yeah,
know. We'll be
yeah.
ready for it. We'll have our masks and our gloves and we'll be
Abs-
all ready to go.
all ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an experience, right? It's a totally different, and it was interesting to see how people showed up in the first 3 weeks. And actually did a sort of like a word cloud, because I
Uh-huh.
had one of the seminars and I asked people in terms of, what are you feeling right now? What's going on? Just put the
Yeah.
words in, and I created a word cloud from those words.
Oh,
And
okay.
it spanned the gamut, but a lot of it was around opportunity. That was the huge thing that people saw. Of course, you had ambiguity, uncertainty, scared, all those other
Right.
words and feelings that came out. But I just thought in terms of challenges and opportunities were the two key things that
That's good.
resonated around this.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then seeing how people kind of showed up in that moment and how they kind of evolving, and as we transform into this into new reality, if you will, it's just very interesting.
Yeah, you'll have to see. I mean, unfortunately,
Mm.
a lot of the people you and I interact with are generally more open to this kind of stuff. Like the people that are really negative, they're probably not coming to your seminar. You know, you're only reaching 20% of the people,
25
and out of
people.
that, yeah, like, but you keep doing the good work, trying to reach as many people as you can. But yeah, I mean, I find that in the communities that we work in, I think that the search for opportunities are common because that's how you get through things, right? You
Hmm.
got to be positive. So
Hmm.
you're not going to
Hmm.
say, well, the world's coming to an end, I might as well just pack it in and sit in the corner, because you don't have that choice, right? You got
Right.
families and you got bills to
Absolutely.
pay, and
Yep.
yeah, so you got to
Yep.
find and look, there, I hate to say it, but there's going to be parts of the economy that get crushed, and there'll always be people that survive
Yeah.
because they're good, and there's other
Yeah.
people that'll and they'll have to change, and we're
Yeah.
going to change in the way
Yeah.
that we do things.
Absolutely. But I also, in my world, I talk about the iceberg,
Uh-huh.
meaning that you have a top layer
Little
above the
above
water,
and a big below, right?
big below. And one of the things that I, highlighted as something that was below the waterline was this financial stability piece.
Yeah.
And I say that because when you look at some of the companies, because you mentioned those that might be here, maybe not here,
Right.
you look at it from a cash flow perspective, right? And what was being masked for that financial management, and what was
Right.
being masked, and
Yeah.
overall operations, and what was
Yeah.
being masked. And it's now risen to the top in terms of, oh, I'm exposed.
Right.
What
Well,
do I
cash flow
do?
hides a lot of things. It really does. And it stops and the curtain pulls back and you're like, how are we even in business,
Yes, yes,
And
yeah,
that's true personally too. A lot of people, if they're
yes,
working and they're getting money, they're paying their bills, they're
yeah.
running up a little bit of debt or up and down, and
Or
it
living way below
stops
their
and boom.
means, right? Past their means too. So yeah,
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 exactly. And they don't really realize it
right.
until it's too late and they have no
Mm-hmm.
retirement, or they, whatever.
Mm-mm.
Or they got $1
Mm-mm.
million of debt sending their kids to college because they haven't been able to save. I know a lot of kids are rethinking. They're like, you know what, mom, if I got to work from home, in college next year, I should take a semester off. What are we paying $50,000 for me to stay home for?
Yeah.
Yeah, go get
And
some
people rethinking that.
experience.
Yeah. Or they're even thinking too, maybe the community colleges might be a better bet right now
Yeah,
until things kind of get a little
right.
bit more safe, right?
Right.
And
It's a
they're
lot
actually deferring
cheaper.
that.
You
Yeah.
could work and go to school at the same
Yeah.
time, get some experience.
Yeah.
You know, my
It's
son was hoping to go overseas, maybe France, because he took French and so forth.
so
But
lovely.
they're all
Where,
programs are shut down.
yeah. Yeah. And they're
Yeah.
blocking the borders too. So it's just sort
Right.
of
You
like,
can't go. Which, by the
yeah,
way, creates another problem for the universities because now you have these kids, this group of contingency that they were like, oh, well, they're going to be away. So we don't have to worry about them. Now they're
right.
going to be back
Yeah.
and they're short on housing and they got a social distance. I don't know
Yeah.
how they're going to do this. I mean,
It's a new reality, right? It's the whole new reality of how we have to operate. And I think that, by saying, oh, I can't wait until we get back to normal, but
what is normal?
exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking normal, I think that you're kind of being more fixed mindset in terms of what you're looking at versus, okay, this is the new reality and how are we going to be operating and moving and migrating in
Right.
this space so that way we can thrive as opposed to surviving, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I'm normal just has to do with what you can deal with. It's not going to be normal, like
Right.
back to what it was.
But people are still holding on and being attached to that. And
I
that's
know.
another thing that kind of I get curious around too, is like, really?
What news are you watching? You know? Yeah, right. Don't you go to all those seminars every day about COVID and this and that and the new world and what you're going to do and all that type of stuff?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
not only that too, you talk about it from another thing that was kind of I put on the fringes, meaning it wasn't really on top, but it wasn't on bottom either of the on the iceberg,
Yeah.
mental health,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely.
And what's been risen around that in terms of really understanding people, the psychology, and how they're going to thrive, and what does that mean for companies and support for them
Right.
during COVID and beyond.
Yeah. How do you take care of your employees who are afraid to come back to work, even though maybe you can partially? Maybe you come in 2 days a week and you have different shifts and they're like, I don't even want to come at all.
Right,
So do you treat
right.
those people? Do you provide them with mental health services? Therapy? I don't know.
Well, that's why I think that a combination of things need to be taking place. And of course, ongoing stress management trainings too, to
Right.
support them at all levels, whether you're working at home or going into the office,
Right.
because there's a different level of stress. And while we are all going through this together, we're not in the same boat.
Right.
And because of different level of stressors and anxieties that people are experiencing, and it's not to name, shame, and blame, it just because one group says, oh, it's no big deal, but still to really acknowledge that and to provide the support for those individuals at all levels, regardless.
Yeah, look, even from a corporation standpoint, they make financial and they make economic decisions to run their companies. They need their employees to be productive. So the question is, do you replace those employees when it probably costs more to train new employees and maybe they'll have problems too emotionally, or do you help them stay productive and feel good about
Hmm.
themselves and not be so afraid?
Hmm.
Probably it's in their interest to do that.
Well, what I'm finding, because I'm talking to a lot of execs, I'm talking to a lot of professionals, and they are being very productive right now in the environment. They've learned to adapt,
Right.
great, and being productive in that space. And some companies have even now shifted their model from, going have a brick and mortar, for example, to an
Yeah.
online platform,
Right.
and involving their employees in terms of that decision making process, how they want to operate, how do they see the future, because if you're just doing a top bottom decision making, you're not going to really get that ownership and understanding with your
Right.
employees, and they may not feel that comfort, like you said, in terms of going in, because they've been hidden, if you will, from
Right.
that decision making process.
Right. And I think companies are realizing they're more productive than they expected employees to be. Like it's okay to have employees working. They don't have to be supervised on top of you. I was talking to a friend of mine in the neighborhood. She works for the Port Authority, and she has a management team that report to her,
Hmm.
the middle management, juniors, seniors, but they also have people that were just hired like in February
Yeah,
out of college. These
yeah,
kids, they don't know what to do. And normally she's supervising them. She's there for
right.
them to pop in or check on their work, but that's hard to do when you're doing it via Zoom. So she said she has a lot of trouble managing these people.
Yeah.
It's different if she had all senior people.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I also question the onboarding process that takes place, because there's a talent management thing that happens to happen, right? And how are
Right.
you evolving that to include those being new recruits that you're bringing on board?
Right.
reimagining and reframing what that looks like, and the additional added support that you're going to need to build in your time to enable them to have those, ask those questions, and be okay not knowing, but also being able to delegate too, and having them be supervised around the work.
Right. Yeah, but
So
good luck. It's not Johnson and Johnson. It's the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. They're
I
like a
know,
lost agency. Like
no.
New Jersey doesn't want it. New York, they're like in between two states and no federal support. It's like the post office, but nobody wants to help them.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It's government. It's a whole
Yeah,
different world.
yeah. Well, I
So
know
let's.
that in some government agencies too, they had to buy their own laptops for the first time. So yes, I can understand that piece.
Yeah, and a
But
government
anyway,
salary.
yeah.
That's great. I hope they get a discount. Unbelievable. Yeah. So let's talk. But this is an entrepreneurs podcast, so we're seeking an audience. Hopefully, I have an audience that are entrepreneurs and people in the entrepreneurial space, and all the social media influence I talk to, the influencers I talk to are focusing on their audience is also small business people, small business owners, and so let's talk about that in terms of suggestions, thoughts, advice for people out there who are dealing with all this stuff as small business owners.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too, because the things that come to my mind around what should we do or what should we be doing at this point,
Yeah.
if you've not already started evaluating at the people phase, you've already done the cash flow, you've already done that piece. Now
Right.
it comes down to the people.
Right.
Who are the people that you're going to need to take your business forward, moving forward?
Right.
And you should actually be, I call it triaging your human resources, your human capital, really and truly. Because if you're not if they weren't priority to begin with, they're not priority now.
Right.
So that you've got to shift that mindset, because you're going to need them more than ever.
Right. Yeah, because maybe you're doing a lot of things yourself that you can't do now because you're working from home and you're social distanced, and you need help. Like you're talking about like virtual assistants, all kinds of different people,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And how are you building that? How are you building your circle and your tribe and your team, if you will, to get you there? Now more than ever, you need more different critical thinking skills, different creativity skills.
Right.
You're not looking for people who are waiting for you to tell them what to do, because this is where you kind of need that people to kind of push you and pull you forward, as opposed to just saying, hey, what do we do next? That's not the type of group that's going to help you. So that's what I'm talking about, triaging your people.
That's good. And I guess part of that comes with like automating things through those kind of services, right? Yes. So you're not doing all the things that you used to do on a daily basis, which you probably shouldn't have been doing anyway.
Right.
But yeah.
And this is not the time for you to sit into minutia and get into the minutia of things.
Right.
It's now a time to look to reevaluate your business model. Yes. Absolutely. Now is the time to reevaluate. What does that look like? What was working and what was not working? Where could you become more efficient, and where do you want to put more energy moving forward? And also reevaluating your strategy. Yeah. What is the strategy moving forward? Because you can't do what you were doing previously. Right. Some things are limited, right?
Right.
And so looking at it from that human resources, from technology, your processes really, and then the strategy that you need to do that. I was just talking to someone who talked about marketing integration, where it's not necessarily about you not necessarily having different pockets of marketing streams, but now being very streamlined in terms of the messaging, your targets, and the mediums through which you're going to be utilizing. So everything becomes very fine-tuned at this point, because you want to make sure you're talking to the right people at the right time.
Yeah. All that content marketing and who you're reaching and the message that you're putting out. A lot of that can be automated, or like you said, with their virtual assistants that are available. They're very good social media marketing and handling your email list and putting all that stuff together for you. And as opposed to, for a lot of people, learning it now for the first time. They had a LinkedIn account, but they never knew what to do with it.
Right.
I think for the first 5 years of LinkedIn, like 10, 15 years ago, I had this account. I was like, well, what am I going to do with this? And then I started to realize I was working with a lot of medical professionals. And one day I get a LinkedIn request from a doctor. So I was like, I didn't even know doctors are on LinkedIn. So I accepted it. And then I realized, wait a second, now I have access to his whole circle. These people are popping up. And I started, I connect with a lot of financial professionals on LinkedIn. That's how we kind of network over time. But I think you're right. You have to kind of evaluate, like, what are you going to do going forward? It's the E-Myth, right? Theory. You got to become the person that drives the business, that is the business developer, that isn't doing the minutia, because you don't have the cash flow now. So you got to bring the cash flow in.
Right. Absolutely. And now's not the time to be silent. Now's not the time to go dark. You have to
Right.
be ever more present and let people know that you are open and you're continuing. It's not a matter of just I'm open and just trying to and treading water, but you
Yeah.
are open.
You got to pivot a little bit, right? So what have you seen in terms of, because you obviously talk to a lot of people, what have you seen in terms of different industries and what kind of pivots people are making and the things that they're doing, with their businesses to stay
Sure.
relevant?
Well, those who thought that they were going to be just very myopic in terms of the geographical locations,
Right.
now's the time to start expanding out.
Yeah.
Right. And I saw that because there's some times where oh, but you're here, you're there. I said, so it's a
Right.
global economy.
Zoom. Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
get
I guess that's
global.
even from an HR standpoint, right? Your human resources don't have to be in New Jersey where
No,
I am. They could be in Oregon, right?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
definitely expand your borders.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I've noticed. Also, in terms of reimagine how you interact with your customers. You just don't. It's not just the one-way funnel anymore. Get creative and rethink your communication with them.
Right.
Meaning that if you were, my business only in person. No,
No.
you have Zoom. Maybe you could create different channels to get to start qualifying them and
Right.
looking at how you're qualifying them, not only using the technology piece, but also the human interaction pieces that can be done to
Right.
bring your energy and to bring your brand and to bring your services to them. So there's another way through which you're looking at it, and it could be from a video. Maybe you haven't stepped in and thought, oh my God, because you talk about you're hearing your voice, seeing yourself on screen.
Yeah,
Woo!
it's very hard. I know. I used to do videos for my firm before I broke up my firm, and I was going in Saturdays. I had to like shave and put on a suit and do these things, and then you'd film it and you'd watch. You'd be like, "Oh, I don't like this," and you have to do it again and
Okay.
again. It was just, I just gave it up. It's video's not for me. So someday maybe I'll do that. I do that one thing on Thursday, the little update that I do
Yeah.
online, but besides that, I don't. It's not for me. So, but
But
some people
definitely,
they live on YouTube, all their stuff.
yes, yes. They
Yeah,
live on YouTube. They have their following, but really, it's an opportunity for you to show how authentic you are because there's so much noise out there,
yeah,
and you're going to get lost. And if out of sight, out of mind. So thinking
right.
about how creative can I be to get in front of my audience so they can hear me.
Right, and especially if your business is very visual. There was a woman I was talking to the other day. She calls herself out as the toy tamer. What she does is she does almost like, people come in and put closet organizers, but she
Hmm.
does it for playrooms. So they'll come in,
Oh,
build, shelving units and, organize all the toys and set up learning centers for the
hmm.
kids. I mean, redo a whole basement, but they video the whole thing.
Oh,
And
cool.
she has all these videos online, and they even speed it up so you see basically a 6 or 8 hour project in 20 minutes.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
fascinating. And people are like, I want that in my basement. My kids are ruining our house. And it's very visual. So she's able to do that. I have a guy who's did I tell you about the professional eater, competitive eater? So
No.
this guy, he's came on my podcast. It's going to come out in like a month or two. And he goes around the world competitively eating, like, not like hot dog contest, but like,
Okay.
a restaurant has an 11-pound pizza and you get it for free if you eat the pizza. So he'll show up with somebody else and they'll do a challenge, but he gets a free meal. It doesn't pay his bills, but he's got 1 million followers on YouTube
Wow.
because they've been videotaping
Right.
all this stuff. The funny thing is he's now studying to become a dietitian so he can teach people not to eat like this. He's a big guy. He used to be a football player. It's pretty funny, but yeah, but he's found a kind of a niche for himself
Nice.
in terms of
Nice.
that kind of stuff. But I think, yeah, so you got to be relevant. That's good advice. Okay.
Yes, yes. And then also the mental health piece, I think it's very going to be very important.
Right.
And
Don't be
keeping,
afraid to talk to somebody about it. Right.
don't be afraid to talk about it
Right.
and asking for help around it, right? Because like I said, everyone's on different gradients, everyone's experiencing different things and different
Right.
stresses. And
Right.
so you need to make sure that's continuous and not just a one and done thing
Right. And
around
even in
that
a
piece.
place where if nobody has cash flow and it's hard to pay for things right now, there's a lot of people willing to help you,
Yes,
for free for
yes,
now. And then you get
yes,
back and you start
yes,
talking because,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, and there's a lot of support out there that they can support, and they want to help out given the circumstances that they have.
Right.
But also, too, in terms of keeping creativity and innovation, that the softer skills, you got to nurture
Right.
those. Don't
Yeah.
forget those, and don't put them on the table because that's what's going to be needed to help your people to help you propel. So
Right.
definitely,
Like, so how can you like not necessarily transform your business, but be creative going forward into what's really going to be a new economy? I mean, you and I don't remember if we said this on the mic or not, but we're probably headed for a pretty big recession. I mean,
yeah, we
there are
talked
going to be
about
parts of
that.
the economy that just tank. There'd be some that go up.
Yeah,
There's the suburb residential housing market's probably going to go up as the markets in the major cities, people
because
going to leave,
yep,
and
yep,
the
yep.
office building market's going to collapse probably because how do you social distance? Your income's down. You're going to triple your space to separate your people. You're not going to do that. So yeah, there's gonna be a lot of virtual work, a lot of remote
Yeah.
working, and it's
Yeah.
gonna change a lot of stuff. So I'm not saying I know what's gonna happen, but it's not gonna be good.
No,
You
but we also
know?
brace ourselves for that too, and
Yeah.
keep tooling. Don't just sit at the sidelines. Keep
Right.
tooling.
And
Yeah.
if you don't like what you're doing, maybe it's a time to kind of figure out
What?
what your skills are and what you can, pursue
Right.
depending on the position you're in. Some people
Right.
have 3 kids in college and it's a little hard to make a pivot. But
Yeah.
yeah,
No.
look, people are
Yeah.
look in my community, you know, all the packages are still coming in from Lululemon and all these different places because a lot of them are city workers and they're still employed. They're working from home and
Yeah. Yeah.
they haven't lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
solopreneur is not so much the case.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think that's an important part that you mentioned about the solopreneurs, because it's I, in terms of for us to navigate that new world, not from a business perspective, but also in how we're interacting with our clients.
Yeah.
Because if we're going in, that takes transportation, that takes different things that we're not really part of in terms of, are we testing ourselves? Do we have to prove that we've been tested? I mean, do we
Right.
walk around with a little switch sticker? I don't know what you know what I mean in terms of those
Right.
things. So just looking at it from that perspective in terms of how we have to prove that we're healthy, we're good, we're in business. I mean? And we can come onto your property if you want us to come
Right.
on your property.
Of
So
course.
those are
You
things
use
that
the
to kind of think about it.
precautions and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
I did so much networking during this and I continue to do it because I want to make sure I stay relevant, whether my clients are open or not. I don't want people think you passed away during the coronavirus pandemic because they didn't hear from you
Absolutely.
for 3
Yes,
months.
absolutely. And now's the time more than ever, stay connected, start
Yeah.
cultivating relationships and building new ones. And, what I mean, just in terms of not only just to say, hey, I'm back in business, but hey, how are you?
Right. I've never
Yeah.
made more connections in my life. And it's funny because one of the networking things that we both go to, they had I don't know if you were on that night, but they had a question where they would say, the question was like, how many Zoom meetings did you go? I use Zoom like,
Yeah.
loosely.
Yeah.
Video meetings have
Right.
you attended this
Right.
week? So people were like, oh, I went to 3 this week. I went to 4. So I said, do like in-person meetings count? They're like, yeah, I guess like one-on-one type like
Yes.
these. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I said, I think I did 40 this week. They're like, 40? I'm like, well, what are you doing during the day? I mean, you're that busy where you can only go to 3 meetings if you're a solo entrepreneur, I hope you're that busy, but they're not. They're sitting around going, oh, well, what do I do now? And like, okay,
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah.
they're posting stuff. I don't know what you got to stay relevant. I reposted an article yesterday. There's an article about COVID pricing. Like there's some businesses that are passing on the costs of the social distancing that's going on with their business but you got to be real careful about that because you could alienate your client base if you're not
Yes.
careful because
Yes.
they're struggling too. Now they got to pay
Yes.
extra for their haircut because
Yes.
you got half as many chairs at your barbershop.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
really recognize the reality of what we're all kind of facing.
Right. Right.
It's like saying,
Right.
I'm taking my problem, make it your problem. Well, you already have your own
No
problems.
problem.
So,
And
but
what do we do about this? Yeah,
yeah,
it's going to be an interesting way as it unfolds and slowly unfolds to see where things fall and on what
yeah,
sides of the coin we are all here, in terms of that space. So it's going to be interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So so do you have any like advice for people if somebody's out there and they're listening? Because there's a lot of people that hold themselves out as financial advisors, a lot of people that hold themselves out as coaches. Yeah, I know you can make a face, but it's true. And because there's no barriers to entry really in a lot of industries. Everybody would be a lawyer if they didn't have to pass the bar. So, there's a lot of noise there. So do you have any advice as to like,
Sure.
because I'm here to promote your business too. So if
Absolutely.
there's advice of, how do you choose a coach? Who do you work with? Those kind of things.
Yes, for me, I've been also looking at from that perspective, and I call it now triaging brands and
Okay.
looking at the brands in terms of how they're communicating. Is it all salesy, or are they really
Right.
there in terms of providing valuable information that I need?
Right.
Who's communicating to me?
Yeah.
And who's radio silent?
Right.
That also indicates to me in terms of even when I don't need you, are you only there, or are you
Right.
going to be there 24/7 for
That's
me,
a good
right?
point. Right.
So that's what I'm looking at too. And then go back to basics and look at the credibility. do some testimonials and call people up before you say, yes, I want to give my money to this person.
Right.
Because not everyone's of the cut of the same cloth, and everyone has
Right.
their own different approach. So do the digger. Now's the
Sure.
time to do digger deeping in terms of analyzing who you want to work for. What are their values? What do
Right.
they represent? How are they communicating the information? Are they knowledgeable? Or are they just, a lot of banter?
Yeah.
So
Is it
that's
a good
what,
fit for you? Because you're not going to take every client. You'll be
no,
like, I can't help that person. That doesn't fit with
absolutely.
what I'm
And it's
doing.
advice. And if they're having I had one person actually got on the phone with me, did not ask me once about me,
Really?
talked all about what they can do. And I said, you don't really understand my business. And they hung up before I could even, do you want to hear about me? So
That would be a big part of the decision-making process, right? You have to know
exactly.
what you do and who you are, what your values are. But you know what? But that's a reflection of like nervous. Like people get on, they talk all about themselves, and then they walk away. They're like, I just had this great conversation with Simone, and you're like, they have no idea who I am. Like I try to go to networking events. I think my goal is to never talk about myself
Yes,
during the meeting.
absolutely.
Let that, because people like to talk anyway, and you
Yeah,
just learn about people. They don't need to know about you. They will get to you. Well, not that person, but most people
right,
will
right.
get to you and figure out if there's a fit. Did you ever hear
Yes.
from that person again?
Actually, they ended up calling me back again, and again, nothing about me.
That's
So I said, you know
hysterical.
what? This is,
They
I
think you're
said,
great. They're like,
I,
I know Simone. She's fantastic. What does she do? Oh, I don't
I
know.
don't know, but I want
Never
to sell her
asked.
stuff.
Right.
So yeah, so from that perspective, that's what I'm looking at from how I am reevaluating a lot of the people and companies that I'm doing business with, big, small, and indifferent,
Right.
from that perspective. And it's really coming down to what knowledge are they imparting? Are they really there to add value, or just really to take?
Right.
And really and truly, would I want to work with them at post this, or and beyond? And so that's
Right.
what I'm looking at from that
Do you
perspective.
do so? Obviously, if you go into corporations, you're doing groups and one-on-one type of stuff. Do you do that with the entrepreneurs, the solo people, or you put them into groups, or you're always working with them one-on-one?
I do work with them one-on-one because I'm very into the unique business person piece of how they operate and what they're doing. So I typically do one-on-ones with them and work with their business accordingly. And then if they have teams that they want to work with, then that's where we kind of branch out and do the group work. But it's all around a certain goal. Like, for example, I want to help them become better business development people, and I'm working through
Okay.
that system from that perspective. But one-on-one grouping.
And are you working more with corporations right now, or individuals,
I
or?
do combination actual work,
Okay.
a combination of small business and mid-sized companies is what I'm focused on right now, and as well as the solopreneurs. So it just depends upon what their needs are. But usually, the thing is that they're feeling very stuck right now.
Yeah.
And so they're looking not necessarily for someone to throw tools and things at them, but more in terms of strategic thought partner. And that's what I'm
Right.
playing right now, the strategic thought partner to
Like a
help them.
guide to kind of,
A guide and strategy, a lot of guide and
yeah,
strategy.
bouncing ideas off of and figuring out what happens next.
Absolutely.
Yeah, things they can control as opposed to a lot of things that people feel like they can't control right now. I think
Right.
that has to do with a lot of the mental health issues, right? Because a lot of people don't like, I mean, you can't control everything in your life, but right now, a lot of things that are really beyond our
Yeah.
control. We're just sitting
And then
around waiting.
and then refocusing then too, in terms of what are the real true qualities that you're bringing, what are the true strengths, and how do you leverage that, right?
Yeah.
And but keep in mind that we're also looking at terms of the weak areas, right, where the breakdowns, and
Yeah.
then how are we going to be developing that, so that provides a funnel to build more strength and resiliency and agility. So that's what I'm also looking at too within the business.
Right. Well, a lot of that you said, like the cash flow kind of subsides and they show themselves. So now
Right.
is a chance to, the smoke's cleared and you can say, oh, well, I didn't realize that wasn't working, or I was
Right.
spending more time doing that and it wasn't bringing
Right.
in any money, and
Right.
all
Right.
those types of stuff. That's all good
Absolutely.
advice. So Simone, I appreciate you coming on, spending a good amount of time with me.
Thank you.
And let me hold on a second. I will turn this off.